the real purpose here today, the real big idea here, that me and Keegan are talking about is just kind of, as Christians today, are we following Jesus, or are we following uh, more of a culturally influenced religious institution? And the point that I came at it, it's kind of your head and mine coming into this. Um, One of the things I don't see, many Christians don't seem to know how to answer a lot of very practical questions about faith and God that the world is demanding answers to. And, this all was born out of, this conversation was born out of a video series I started on YouTube called Questions for Christians. And it's literally just, it's about the hard questions people want to ask at church, but they're afraid to,
Hmm.
because they're going to be ostracized or belittled or just talked to death, and then walk away so many times and still just not have an answer to their question. And those same questions, and the ones I'm on the channel on YouTube asking, those are the same questions the world is asking. And when there isn't some sort of logical explanation, or you can't answer it at least intelligently, or even say you don't know, that takes a gap between people in the church or people in God, if you see it the same way, and it widens that gap. And they go, man, I just don't know, because when I researched with those people, they gave me an answer. When I asked them about why they believe that answer, they got mad, they got critical, they got condescending, and it was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And that that does happen outside the church, but I don't know that it happens more anywhere than in a church or religious setting. And what this call today here is not, is us, trying to drive people away from their faith. We're both believers, and we grew up in church. We've both been to Bible college. We'll talk about that in a minute. But it's not to start an argument. It's not to incite criticism. That doesn't do any good for anybody. That inflates two egos or more, and then they're pitted against each other. Nothing happens good there. And so that's not what this is. But like I said, I grew up Catholic. Then, I was in Pentecostal circles during my teen years and my earlier adult life throughout the years. I went to Bible college, Southwestern AG University down here in Texas. And the other day, when Keegan, you texted me, I was walking through the woods. I walked through the woods for 3 hours the other day, just thinking about this stuff. And that's when you texted me. And that's where this whole call came about. And it was just these questions I have that, again, the reason I say, understand we went to Bible college is that I'm having a lot of these with this YouTube series, having these questions thrown at me that are just, or the answers to my questions, they're just like large blocks of scripture text. It's more like, well, here's what the Bible says. Here's what the Bible says. You and I went to Bible college, so like we know what the Bible says. We're not questioning that. It's more on the level of, why do we believe what it says, or does that really mean something? And tell us a little bit about your background with church and where you went to college a little bit, Keegan.
Yeah, sure, man. No, thanks for putting this together as well, Brian. Really appreciate it, man. Yeah, I grew up in church all my life. Definitely, yeah, coming from a Pentecostal background, but went to a Presbyterian school here in South Florida. Then went to Oral Roberts University in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Been around, multiple churches while I was in Tulsa. Had a chance to, if you've never been to Tulsa, there are bukus of churches, and
Every street
bukus,
corner.
yeah, every street corner, basically, and a lot of different denominations. So I got a chance to visit, some places I never would have tried before. Anglican churches, Lutheran churches, Baptist churches, independent churches, and so it was interesting. Kind of being involved in all of that while I was there. And now I do go to a very good church here in South Florida. Just before we get this, started, I want to say I do love my church. I love the people that go there. I do believe that they are, they love God and they're there to help people, which to me is, as we kind of get into this, is the biggest crux in all of this, right? Do you
Yeah.
love Jesus and do you love people? Because that's what it's about. It's not about the dogma of following this or following that, because certain denominations, drinking's okay. Certain denominations, you're going straight to hell if you try wine. But it's all part of, learning about the beauty of God, learning about the beauty of humanity, and how we can best work with each other, help each other, because no matter what, God made us in his image, whether someone's a Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, it doesn't matter. We're all made in the image of God. And so with that is how do we show that to people at this point? Or are we kind of getting lost into what our denominations believe Christianity should be? Are we getting lost into believing we have to look a certain way, dress a certain way, speak a certain way? You're talking about throwing out Bible verses to people. I joke around and say, that's called Christianese, right? If you speak Christianese to a non-believer, they don't understand anything that you're telling them. Or if you throw them a Bible verse, and
saved from what?
Yeah, saved from what?
Am I in danger?
Yeah. What are you talking about? It doesn't make any sense. So I think the biggest thing that people want to see today, kind of going back to your series, Brian, is that people want to see things that are real. They want to see things that are honest. And it's also honest to say, I don't know. And I think that's the part that people sometimes, trip over. It might be like, well, my grandfather, this is how they did it. So this is why I do it. But is that really what the Bible says? Is that really what Jesus, if you're a Christian, is that what Jesus wants you to do? To shun people, or does he want you to go and sit and eat with people and get to know them and build that relationship? So I think we've kind of come to the point as a society, as a whole, not just the churches, where you're kind of being forced to pick sides, right? You're either a Republican or a Democrat. You're either a Baptist or you're a charismatic. You're either this or you're either that. And that's not the way it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be you're human first, right? And then being a human, I can say I'm a child of God. When I say I'm a child of God, is that I believe that there is God. And I believe that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and that his grace covers all of my shortcomings, because we all have them. And that when I look at people who aren't Christian, is to know that God's grace is there for them as well. There's nothing wrong with them. And I think sometimes as Christians, we kind of get to the point where we think there's something wrong with them because they're not a Christian. No, it's just that God's grace is there for them as well. And how do I become just friends with them? What I mean? I'll be honest with you. The people that have hurt me the most in life have been Christians, right?
I
The
agree.
people have actually been there to help me the most through my struggles and my hardest times have been people that are non-believers. So it's, I just throw that out there as a point, just because we sometimes get lost into these facts of, we think, well, we're part of a Christian community. Everything's going to be, nice and beautiful with them.
Well, I think the problem that we run into in the church is that once you make a truth claim, you have to substantiate and defend that. Now you're on the hook to be accountable because you go, well, I believe it's this way. Okay, so if somebody believes different, now you have to say, they say, okay, why do you believe that? And you have to explain it logically, or at least in an intelligent way where it can be understood and plausible. Mm-hmm. The average Christian I meet, and this is no insult, it's just the case, it's the state of where we are. The average Christian can't do that. And even with everything I was taught in Bible college, I was like, when people throw these scriptures at me, like when I'm asking these very simple questions about life, why we believe what we believe, they throw scriptures at me. I'm like, you're throwing. I've never been a pastor, but you're throwing scriptures at a preacher. I've spoken in a lot of churches over the past 15 years. Some would say I am sort of a preacher type thing. It's like you're quoting scripture to a preacher. It's like, it's not that he doesn't know what it says. And so it's like, and that's the same kind of thing. Like, if your kids in school and they're discussing Romans 1, and there's like a public school, it comes up in a debate maybe about the Bible. The unbeliever is not asking what Romans 1 says. They're asking why you believe what it says. And churches, I don't think by and large teach you to understand why do we believe this. And for me personally, I'm an extremely practical person. I'm a very bottom line thinker. It's like my first highly controversial video, surprisingly, was about Adam and Eve. And it was, did Adam and Eve have sex before they were married? Now, here was my whole point of the video. It wasn't sex before marriage, even though that was a big point. It was, how do we know they were married? Was there a formal, how does God define that marriage between the man and the woman? Is it because, well, your local courthouse says, here's your certificate, you're legally married? So in that case, we're putting God's definition, basing that on society standards, which Christians don't want to do. But then if that's not the case, then, well, they were living together, quote unquote. They weren't officially married in some formal manner with some certificate. Well, now they're fornicators. Well, what defined how they were married? In their scripture, it says Adam and his wife. So, well, God married them when they were created. Okay, well, we came out of them. So wouldn't that be the same for us? I mean, these are questions that churches never ask or address. But it's like, I have friends who have been, in the church for years, and their marriage lasted 5 years, and they've been married 3 times. And then I have other friends who they've never been married. They're not legally married, and they've been together 35 years, and it works. And so it's like, well, a tree is known by its fruit. And so we have an issue here. Like, my whole point with that video was, if the world was getting nuked and there was like 2 people left, Adam and Eve all over again, would we be like, darn, we can't have sex and reproduce because there's no courthouse to go to say we're legally married? Well, if that's not it, then what is? What constitutes a man and woman being married in the eyes of God? If it's not that, but this is fornication, widely right now in churches in our day and age, if you and your woman, let's say you and Sarah weren't married, and you go to a church and they're like, oh, you guys live together, you're not married. Well, what do they mean by married? They mean you have a legal court document, you at least went down to the JP, and you got like the ticket. But now you're placing that definition of God's definition of marriage in the hands of society, which is another argument against that. So it's things like this. And that was a firestorm, by the way. Facebook comments, oh dear God.
And the thing about it is, what we know is like traditional marriage really hasn't been around all that long.
If there's no society to declare it, like, what did they do in the jungle? Like, one guy said, well, God married them in the jungle and they were nudists. And I thought he was being sarcastic. Turns out I think it was serious. And my response was, man, I could have saved a lot of money on my wedding. Me and Jamie could have just went out in the woods naked, invited God, and we're married. And I wasn't being crass. I was being serious, funny, but serious. But then I'm like, oh, I thought he was joking. I still don't know if he was.
He might have
but
been.
It makes a good point.
He might have been serious. The whole point of marriage, later on, was just to show people that you were a couple, right? You had a priest bless it. But people also got married, men got married to more than one woman. More than one woman, excuse me, got tongue tied. Yeah. They had multiple wives. That's why I said
David,
marriage
man to God's own heart.
Yeah, he had a lot of wives. Solomon had a lot of wives, but that led to a lot of trouble.
He had even more concubines. Yeah,
even for example, Jacob had 2 wives, and they were 2 sisters. And people seem to gloss over that with like no problem whatsoever. You know what I mean? So his kids were brothers and cousins at the same time. But that's just the way it was.
He was his own grandfather somehow. Yeah,
somehow, right? But that's just how it was culturally back then. Is that part of it was to show that that woman belonged to you. In terms of almost kind of like you own something, right? Whereas now marriage has kind of changed dramatically towards that. And there is beauty in marriage. There really is, in saying that, we're dedicating ourselves to each other and to God, right? And that you're not going to step outside of that. That is absolutely a beautiful thing. But, who really instituted it, right? And what exactly does it mean for people who aren't Christians?
Well, imagine being maybe a secular ruler who is not a Christian. Mm-hmm. And you have a society full of people where everyone's sleeping with everybody. Now, number one, disease is going to be a problem. Number two, now people are getting mad because this guy slept with her and he thought she was his, but then she was with 2 or 3 other guys. Now, well, they thought the same thing. Now they're fighting and killing each other. That's not good for survival because the tribe's trying to kill your tribe. All they have to do is stand there and wait for you all to kill each other until you're weak enough. And so, I mean, for even excuse me, a secular government to go, hey, if they had a hand in this, going, we need to get this together, we need people to believe. I'm not saying it was written this way, but it's not a far-fetched idea. for the sake of our survival, we need to get everyone as much on the same page as possible. We need less disease. We need less fighting amongst ourselves, more unity, so we can be strong and we can keep surviving as a human race. I can totally see that. And I think it had to have been.
And it still happens, right?
And it still happens.
It still happens.
I mean, there's theology right now that is different from theology, 800 or 900 years ago, where like I was talking to a friend of mine, he has he went to seminary, like he knows this stuff. And he's like, like you used to be the outcast if you thought there was a real, literal, conscious, present hell where you actually burn. Like you were the outcast and the weirdo. And now it's different where if you don't believe that, like you're the cast out one, you're at huge risk. And it's like things have also changed over time. And you go, well, who caused those to change? Or who said that was okay? Or, because you have Christian denominations too, different ones that say, well, hell is metaphorical, or it's not a real place. Others are like, yeah, it's flames and, you're sitting in a fire pit. And with a lot of issues, not just that one, and they all use the Bible to justify their answer. Exactly. And if you dig deep, you can honestly look and go, I can see how these three different opinions came from that one verse, and it kind of makes sense. So who knows?
Who knows? But how does it affect the way that I live? How does it affect the way that I treat people? And that's the point I think that we get lost in, right? We follow whatever our institution tells us to do in terms of hell and how we should treat
people. Be careful when
and
any institution tells you what to do. Political structures have never really had people's best interest at heart. And yes, that includes churches sometimes, but probably most of the time. And here's a premise to this, by the way. I've always thought this, if whenever you take like a spiritual truth, something very pure, and you institutionalize it in a way probably perverts it. And what I mean by that is, like, let's say, well, Jesus just went around preaching, like, there's nothing wrong with building churches or having a big church. I'm nothing wrong with that. But the second you put money down on like 20 acres of land for $4 million, and you're going to put a $5 million building on this thing, and you've got enough people donating money monthly where you can afford to build this thing, for the cause. What if you have like 12 really big tithers and they're like 70, 60, 70+% of your revenue? Your message is, I'm telling you right now, better keep those people happy, because if they walk, you're crushed. You're done. You can't uphold the institution. And I don't know a single preacher who could honestly say that at least that thought hasn't crossed their mind if they feel really convicted about a message. I really feel I need to preach it this way, but it might really hack off or anger some of our big donors. And now then it's like, well, are you trusting God or man? That's the next question. But that's even there, and some people do follow it. But if you didn't have all these extras placed on top of the truth, the truth wouldn't have been sort of hijacked to an extent by these external factors now that you're trying to compete with to keep it going. And that's not saying we shouldn't have churches or anything like that, but I don't know how that can't be true, because it's true in a lot of other areas of life too. Does that make sense to you? What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think you're absolutely right, man. You got to remember, preachers are humans too, right? And it's easy to say, if I lose these 6 families, my church is sunk, right? Because besides that, I mean, they also have to think about their families, right? Because they have a salary that they take out from the church. They have assistant pastors that rely on them for their living. So I think it very much happens, whether it's consciously or subconsciously. It does happen because they are human. I mean, it's like this, right? The church is a business when it comes down to it.
Oh, it is.
And
absolutely.
And I've had my own business. I've lost my own business, and I know the pressures that do come on your shoulders, right? Every move that you make and everything that you say, you second guess yourself. The only problem with that is when it comes to like a church sense is, we preach, or we hear preachings of, don't worry about anything. God's got you. God's got you. He takes care of the birds in the air. He's going to take care of you. But when it comes to actually practically putting that into perspective, like, I notice these families are out having orgies whatever. I'm just throwing something out there crazy,
Yeah.
right? You preach against that, you might lose them all. Do you preach against that in a certain way? Or do you kind of temper that down to where it's kind of like a watered down version of the gospel? I do believe it happens. Like I said, they're humans too, whether it's consciously or subconsciously. Now the flip side of that is you have preachers that abuse that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
They
As in
know
any
how
circles. Yeah.
they know how to twist and turn certain buttons so that people can give them more money. And now it's not even the gospel anymore. It's just how much money can we raise by using the name of Jesus, using the term Christianity.
It's
And that
politics.
is where you really see a lot of problems. I can,
Yeah.
like I said before, sometimes consciously, subconsciously, a pastor might water down things because there's a lot on there. And that's between him and God as well. But I think sometimes we have to call out certain people that really manipulate and abuse people to give them more money for themselves. And I think that the world sees that. And
Yeah.
that is a huge problem whenever you try to talk to anybody about Jesus.
Now what if you have a system that's educating these pastors and preachers and saying this is the way you handle this, and this is the way you plant churches in the 21st century, and this is how you, and so they're just going along with what they were taught,
Yeah, you have that.
without considering, like, maybe I was taught wrong, or like I hear, I just think of this. I think of Jesus traveling around speaking. Like, that's what he did. Yeah, he went to the temples and preached at the temples. Like, he didn't have a church. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have churches. Like, I know someone's going to totally pull that out. I'm
Mhm.
not saying that. But did Jesus have the financial stress that he needed a sabbatical for a month every year because he had all this weight on his shoulders of building this institution? Like,
No, but
I don't think he probably had any of that weight on him from that direction, because he didn't take on the liability, materialistically speaking, or financially, to do that. Now, people want to kill him. Yeah, that's kind of a stressor. Like, he had other things, but he didn't take on like this giant financial ability and or liability. And I'm going to build this institution, and then, well, now I have to keep convincing people. And then, when you're trying to convince people you're right, there's high potential for dishonesty, because we're human. I don't care what kind of preacher you are. I don't care how long you've been preaching. Like, everyone's a liar. All right. Like, it's, to some extent we are. It's what we are. We do it. We try not
mhm,
to. I just
it
wonder.
happens.
I wonder if a biblical model. Oh yeah, it happens. I wonder if a more biblical model, I'm just throwing it out there, is more like, grow your church by like growing groups of people that meet in their homes, and you're not trying to control them. You're just saying, hey, this is what we see Jesus did, and we want to be of value to you. And we're not going to try rigidly control you. And did you meet with your group this week? Why not? We see you haven't met in 2 weeks, and or you're missing two people. Have you called them up? Do you need to really, get onto them? Look, you really need to get on them. It's, and this kind of rigid forcing, the thing I've learned about life. I'm not saying we shouldn't make efforts. In business, we need to market, and that takes work. I'm not
Mhm.
saying we don't do that. But there are things in life where, when I've done them, I haven't put forth a lot of my own personal attempt to control, and it worked out way better. It was way easier. The result was better, and I was like 80% less stressed. I mean, there was a time when I was leading a small group, a life group at a church, and it was so rigid. And it's like, why aren't people showing up? Well, people's schedules was a big thing. They just physically weren't in town. And it's like, well, you need to get with them and really hard nose it. You guys committed to this. And it's like, buddy, they're literally not here. And so, but the contrast to that, no, it's like, dude was not hearing it. Like, you don't get it. They're not. I wasn't here for like 2 or 3 weeks. I was on the road. You're like, I'm leading it and I'm not here. And but the contrast to that is this: I do this thing called Friday Night Fire about once a month, and I can put out on Facebook, hey, doing a fire this Friday night, 7:30 to about 11. Um, I'll be sitting by my campfire. If you want to come join me, great. It'll maybe it'll be just me. Maybe it'll be me and 10 other people. The first time I did that, and by the way, great ministry actually happens around that campfire. But I'm not controlling any of it. People don't feel bad if they can't make it, because I don't set that precedence. The first time I did that, I put it out on a Thursday afternoon. 23 people showed up on Friday night at my house. I didn't know 9 of them. And they're just local guys. Awesome. Like, hey, I saw your thing, or a friend. Hey, can I bring my friend? I'm like, yeah, dude. And now every time there might be 7 people, there might be 17. And I just put out, there's no pressure. Great ministry happens. People open up just organically. There's no rigidity. I'm not even trying. Mm-hmm. I'm just opening the door and saying, hey, it'll be what it is. And I wonder how often we miss that in our churches because we're trained to be so rigid, and it has to be this process, or your church isn't going to work, or your church planting isn't going to work, or, I think there's a point we just have to let go. And I don't know where we're taught that.
Yeah, it's tough, right? Because you said a lot there, a lot of good stuff that you brought out there. A couple of things, just going back, I guess maybe to the beginning when you started talking. For sure, preachers are taught how to market, how to grow their church, how to church plant, based on what denomination that they're from. So you have things like the Southern Baptist Convention, you have the Assemblies of God, you have, certain, this Presbyterian council, that Presbyterian council. This is all things that they talk about, and these are all things that they plan. And then these are all things that they go over what they believe that the Bible says in terms of how people should live their lives, how they should be governed. And then you have independent people where some of them are very strict. They want to know before you even apply to a job, you have to come and talk to your pastor. Before you date a girl, you have to come and talk to your pastor. And then you have ones on the very left that are like, honestly, they don't care what you do with your life as long as you come and give them money, right? So yeah. it's a wide, I don't know, what do you call that? It's
a broad spectrum.
Yeah, spectrum, yeah. Right? It's a huge spectrum of what happens there. So it's interesting, right? They all have plans and ideas of what they want to do. And some of it's good. Some of it's good in terms of
sure.
For me, I love anything to do with missions. So you have different denominations that they put most of their focus on missions, how to help the poor, how to feed people, how to, bring people to Christ. That's all good. And then you have other ones that are like, so how are the men controlling the women in your church? It's like, I was like, what in the world did I just now sit down into? Like, women should not wear on pants. If your wife is wearing on pants, she's sinning. I literally heard that in a sermon, and I wanted to get up and leave. I was so embarrassed. But these are the things that are being taught, right? And it's so far away to where now we can talk about what you're talking about with Jesus, right? And his ministry. Jesus had different stress. His stress was, like you said, trying to escape death, but also he was putting so much time into ministry on a daily basis, praying for people, healing people, talking to people. You see times that he takes some time for himself just to walk away, recuperate, go on a boat, right? If you ever been on a boat, it's either relaxing or you're throwing up. But Jesus always found it to be relaxing. So he would take time to do that, but it wasn't like he was worried about money. It was just that he had spent so much of himself pouring into people that he did have to take that step back to recuperate, to go right back into ministry. Paul, he would build tents to raise money. That's how he would raise money to then go, to Rome, to go to Ephesus, to go to Corinth, to go to all these different places. He would raise his own money by doing something with his hands, manual labor. You don't hear about that.
Yeah. And he was signing his own death warrant at the same time. That's what he was working up to.
Yeah. And so
it's like, who do you know who would work up to that, knowing all this work I'm doing, I'm marketing myself, I'm struggling to make money to support my cause, and I might be brutally, barbarically murdered in the end. That was most of the disciples. That was the case.
Yeah, except for John, right? And even John got fried, and he's lived through it. So it's interesting, what happened and how we are today, right? Their terms of preaching there was a lot of miracles involved. There was a lot of, get up, you're healed, and then just talking to people. It wasn't, forcing people to do things that they didn't want to do. Now, when things got out of hand, and this is where I think the church kind of sometimes listens more to Paul than it does Jesus, is that when the church gets out of hand, Paul, sends them letters mainly because of the people who were becoming Christians brought into them their baggage, right? The stuff that they've known all their life. Talk about perspective again.
Mhm.
That, you know, the
It's all
gods
they've
that
ever
they
known. Yeah.
the gods that they worshiped before, you know, they would have drunken orgies, you know, as a form of worship to their god. They would, you know, do this, they would do that, they would do ridiculous things. And so Paul then had to write letters to them to say, listen, don't be getting drunk on wine that leads to this, this, and this. That's not what we do when we worship Jesus. That's what you did when you worshiped other gods. All right.
Yeah. And that
Our
was their
God is,
context.
all
Yeah.
right. But that's what they knew. This is how we worship. This is how we show love. This is our form of communion with one another. And so it's just to clean that up to say, listen, we don't do that anymore because there's nothing edifying in it. It's actually putting you into bad spots. It's leading to gossip. It's leading to fights. It's leading to people leaving the church. So please don't do that. So it's
Well,
kind of like a parameter. And I
yeah,
think
yeah.
we miss that.
Well, in anything to an extreme is going to be unhealthy. And I'll even say that about church. If you go to church like 4 or 5 times a week, like, I don't know how healthy that's going to be, because just mentally what that does to you when you're around something so much, you start overlooking a lot of things just by virtue you're so close to it. I know that's probably blasphemy to a lot of Christians, but it's true. I know people that were in our youth group in high school, and they had to go 3 or 4 times a week after school. And when those people got out of high school, all our Christian friends go, "Oh my gosh, did you hear about so and so? Like, they're not a believer anymore. They fell away. They this or that." And I'm kind of looking at it because I'd been in the army at that point into war and had some really big perspective changes on life. And I thought, just looking at objectively at that person's circumstance, they were force fed with a fire hydrant, this thing, for like their whole lives, especially the last 4 years of high school. They were like, in a sense, I think they were literally choking on this being forced down their throat, where when they got away, it was like, whew, a drinking fountain. Boy, like, okay, maybe I'm hearing other things now, but man, I can breathe at this point, at least. That's kind of nice. And then you wonder why they didn't come back. And at the same time, they had a version of what they now think all this is about God based on what they're bringing to the table because of their individual subjective life experience. Kind of like you just said about, you know, the people who came into the early church from other places. You know, if you grew up super legalistic, old school Pentecostal, and then you go to a Catholic wedding, I'm going to tell you right now, you're going to feel like the devil's in the room because everybody's drinking. And they're going to go, yeah, well, Jesus' first miracle was turning water into wine. And so, and they're not lying. You know, so it's like, and that was one of the videos I did too. I think what you said, people came in, they, you know, had their alcohol and their orgies, and it was leading to that kind of started off the bad thing. And he's like, hey, you shouldn't do that. I think it's really hard to say what, well, we can't say wine is a sin. Like, if we say that, we're saying Jesus sinned. And you know, you can't say that in Christianity because there wouldn't be any. Because if Jesus produced something that caused people to sin after they went through all of the wine they already had, and he's like, hey, I'll make 180 gallons more for you, which is the thought equivalent, 120, 180 gallons. There were 6 jugs, 30 gallons each. Jesus didn't like do a little bit. In that sense, he threw down. And that's not saying, oh, we should go get drunk. Like, that's not what it means. But it's hard for me when somebody says, well, and it like, I didn't even start drinking wine until I was like 35. I was just trying it out, didn't really like it. Then I learned about the processes and it was interesting. and now I'm like, oh, it's kind of cool. This is different. But I'm not going out like killing people. I'm not driving drunk. I'm not cheating on my wife. I'm not, like, I'm literally sitting in my backyard with friends having conversations like this one. It's like, but if we say like, well, drinking wine is wrong, yes, it can lead to bad places, but so can being in church too much, because it can, because people are people and we can distort things. But like, if drinking wine, my argument and that other video, which was another firestorm in the comments, was, well, if drinking wine is wrong, merely drinking it, not getting drunk and leading to other things, but just drinking it, then Jesus produced something that caused people to sin, which would make him be a sinner, and that can't be. And why would he even do it if it was something bad? And I've heard all the arguments, well, it wasn't the same as today, you know, we had different processes now, it wasn't as strong. Look, buddy, people weren't drinking grape juice in the 1st century AD because it tasted so good. It was alcohol, you know, and there are a lot of other factors too. And so I'm not
This,
saying, hey, we should all drink, but like it's a personal thing. And if you're not doing something bad with it, how could it be? Plus, it was Jesus's first miracle, and we've always preached it, his first miracle, and we celebrate it. But don't you dare do it. Like, wait a minute, what? But Jesus did, and you got to tell me he didn't have a sip or two? His mother told him to do it.
yeah,
Like, okay, hey, I'm just saying,
yeah,
that's literally what I see, and that's what the world sees, and that's what they're finding unbelievable.
yeah.
And the rebuttals that most Christians give, they just don't make a whole lot of sense logically as an argument for it. I think the bottom line is, if you do something too much that's destructive, you should not do it.
Mhm. No, for sure. I
But
mean,
if someone else does, then go. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, it's part of this wonderful thing that God gave us called a brain, right? And we got
Yeah,
to learn how to use it. Now, am I going to drink something in front of someone that I know that's had an alcoholic past? You
that's a
know,
different story too.
used to beat his wife, do this, do that. No, no
Absolutely
way.
not. Nope.
I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to tempt them because I think that's being a bad friend.
Yeah.
Besides being a bad Christian, that's just being a bad friend to someone. So that's the first thing. But you look at all the historical context of wine drinking. To always celebrate, they would always drink wine. They would always have, they knew how to enjoy themselves, and the fact that when they had all these different feasts to honor God, and they would always have wine at it. It wasn't, and it's something else, man. It's taking one thing and taking it to the extreme, right? Now, on the flip side of that, if you go to a church and they say, listen, in order for you to serve here, we ask you not to drink while you're serving, because for whatever reason, and you agree to that and you sign your name on the paper to that, I think for your integrity, you shouldn't drink wine because you agree to that. If you say no, this is the reasons why, I'm not getting drunk. My wife and I, we like to go out on a Friday night, get a good steak, have a nice, Cabernet, whatever it is. And I see nothing wrong with that. And if you can't show me that there is nothing wrong with that, then you and I need to have a discussion. So I think sometimes that's kind of the point when it comes to it. If you put your name on something and you have to have your integrity about it, for sure, don't. But you should also stand up for what you believe in and say, listen, and the first time I led someone to Jesus was over a beer.
I totally believe that.
It's one of those things. It's like he didn't want to talk to me unless I took a drink with him. So I took a drink with him, and then he goes, "All right, I can trust you now. Talk to me." In Russia, when I was there, I was, you take a shot of vodka with them because they are very suspicious of you. Who is this person? If you don't take a shot of vodka with them, they're not going to listen to you. They're not going to trust
You don't
you.
exactly look Russian or Siberian by normal
No.
standards either. So they're like, we
No, but
really need to.
yeah. So I went there for missions, but having a shot of vodka with them, all of a sudden now, these people are my best friend. They're bringing out food. They're bringing out, their best of what they have to offer to me, for me to have an opportunity to talk with them and for them to talk to me. And then I could tell them about this great thing of Jesus Christ.
Dude, what you just said is like one of the most beautiful things in the world when it comes to God and faith.
Mhm.
That whole story you just told and how you got to know him and you warmed up to him, they got to know you, and it opened the door for you to do that. It wasn't like you're just means to an end. Like you developed a relationship, like real, genuine,
Mhm.
heartfelt relationship with people. Like what
Well,
you just said was, I think, the true gospel. That's it.
yeah, do you really care for people? You know what I mean? Do you really care for people more than your dogma, than your institution? And going back to what this whole conversation is about is, are we following Jesus' beliefs, or are we following the church's beliefs? Because Jesus went to the taxpayers. Jesus went to the women who were cheating. Jesus went to everybody that was considered to be the lowest of the low. People had leprosy. People had sicknesses. People to where all the Jewish people at the time thought they were the most unclean people. And Jesus would go right to them, right? And not try and beat them over the head with something, but would just love them, create that relationship with them, get to know them, let them know, listen, I know that you have all these other men in your life, but that's okay. God still loves you, and you could pull yourself out of that.
Yeah.
Not like you're going to hell, woman.
Yeah,
Which
like
is what I
repent
feel.
because you're gonna flames, baby. Like,
Mhm.
oh, and if you think about it, if anybody approached you with anything, you or me, and had that combative stance, immediately you're standoffish, and you're never really going to be that effective in delivering your message and convincing them of your way of thinking by hating them. I mean, it's like love is the only thing that can turn an enemy into a friend. It's the only thing, if it can even be done in certain situations. But trying to, like, I mean, Taliban, they try to fear people into submission and believing. People say, "Oh, Islam's the fastest growing religion in the world." That when if you look at it at the surface, or at least at one point, that was apparently the case. But not all people who are converting to that are doing so willingly. They don't want to get their head chopped off, so they're like, okay, sure. But in here, they're not bought in. And they never will be. They're against you, and I think that happens a lot in the church. I mean, because we like to crucify other people crucify other people because they sin differently than we do, and we
Mhm.
put these levels to sin, and that's a whole other theological discussion. Other worse or better sins, and like just generally on the surface, I'm speaking, like there's a gosh, I don't remember the verse. I think it's First Corinthians 6. It's like liars, thieves, slanderers, adulterers, homosexuals, fornicators, those who are divisive will not inherit the kingdom of heaven. I think I quoted the wrong verse, but it's you probably know the one I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Well, I'm like, on a good day, I'm probably 4 of those. I don't try. I'm not dishonest. I try not to be. But like, if you tell a little white lie, like you're already in that group, and people go, "Well, that's what forgiveness is for." But then we go, "Well, wait a minute. One of those things says homosexuality."
Mhm.
Now, we highlight generally in the church, we highlight that one. And it's like, well, that's a different sin. Like, that's not my kind of sin, but that's on the same list. And it wasn't emphasized any more than all the other things that throughout my life, I've been multiple of those. And so
Right.
like when I did the video, did my gay friend go to hell in this video series? That was part of my question, because he even became a Christian. But then he
Mhm.
had other people saying, well, he didn't really. It's like, well,
Who,
really?
who are you to question that, right?
Yeah.
Who are
And
you to
then,
question that?
yeah. And then like an hour and a half after typing back and forth and commenting and having a discussion, they just come out and say something like, well, only God really knows. And I'm like, why couldn't we just said that 90 minutes ago?
Mhm.
And by the way, I saw Joel Osteen say that exact thing on TV, and Christians fried him for it. He was being asked, do homosexuals go to hell or heaven or hell? And he goes, I can't speak for God. I'm just a man. I can't speak for God what he's going to do in that moment. And they fried him. I mean, they always like to fry him and whatever. I don't care if you like him or not, but like he got fried for that. But that's probably the most honest answer I think anyone could ever give. It's
No,
not
for
we're
sure.
not saying it's permissible, but I'm multiple of these other things in this verse, but not that one. And if he has no chance, then boy, I definitely don't. Oh, but you're forgiven. Okay, well that means he is too, right? It I don't know how to
Yeah.
reconcile that right there, because there isn't, at
it's
least right
it's
now.
it's something that as Christians we're conditioned to, right? It's
Condition is
like
key word.
it's like a rallying point for all for most Christians. I would say most Christian denominations, a rallying point is homosexuals go straight to hell. You know, it's kind of like playing Monopoly, go straight to jail, type of deal.
Well
But
put.
it's not. It really isn't. I mean, our rallying as Christians is that we should be trying to love people the way Jesus loved people. And I think if that was our main focus, whatever denomination you're a part of, if you can start with that, you start looking at things a lot differently. You
Yeah.
start looking at people differently. And I think right now, the church as a whole, we've just compartmentalized people so much. Again, it's going back to what I said earlier. Are you this or are you that? No, first and foremost, you're a child, or you're a child of God, right? You're son or daughter of God. First and foremost, it doesn't matter really, it's what you're doing, what you look like. None of that matters. the first thing that matters is that Jesus loves you. And I want to look at you the way Jesus looks at you. So I think if we pray for that, God, I want to look at people the way that you look at them. How can I best meet them where they're at so that I can grow and that they can grow and that we can both get to know you more? I think you would start seeing people's minds change in terms of how quickly they judge others. Because I'll say, just like you, I'm a sinner, bro. Any day, I'm covering a multitude of wrongs, right?
Well, I can tell you right now, you want to challenge their thinking. I'll tell you right now, you get around them, they're going to challenge yours. Mm-hmm. And so, don't come in this thinking, your challenge, your thinking isn't going to be challenged. And I would even say this, because like you said, Jesus went straight to where all the sinners were, the people who needed, the truth. He went right to them. How many Christians do we know that can list like 3 gay friends they have, gay or lesbian, or whatever else they come up with now? And I don't mean that disrespectfully, but apparently there's so many letters in that LGBTQ+++, like who I don't even,
it changes daily.
But yeah. But I say that respectfully for anyone who might be watching this, who is that way. Like how many Christians do you and I know personally, or even looking at ourselves? How many gay people do we know, gay or lesbian, that we're friends with and we have influence in their lives, and we sort of see them or communicate semi-regularly and have relationship, have friendship with them? I'm willing to bet, at least the modern church area where we come from, most Christians, or many, if not most, probably or maybe don't even have one. Again, that's a very broad stroke. I understand I'm making a blanket statement, but how many gay friends does the average Christian have? And if we're really that concerned about them not going to hell, then why are so many Christians mean spirited toward them? If you're that concerned about my eternity, don't be a dick. It's like show me the love you're professing. And that's one thing, unfortunately, we just don't see, or we don't hear that preached either. Because ultimately, if you go to hell, that's your fault. Or it's not my business. It's not it's not my thing. It's not my burden to carry. And I had to realize this earlier on with certain people I cared about who are not believers, and the burden of them, the thought of them going to hell was so heavy. I had to let go of it and go, this isn't mine to carry. Like, I can't keep them in my life. They're toxic, but it's not my burden to carry, because it was like, they're very toxic in my life. But if I leave, then I might be the only light that'll ever be in their life. Well, now I'm at a point where, like, you know what? Jesus can use other people too. And maybe I'm not the one he's wanting to use. And at the end of the day, their eternal destination is not my responsibility. And who am I to think that's in my control anyway? Like, oh, Brian did something wrong, therefore, like, that person went there, that's on him. Like, I have that much power? I think that's almost trying to play God.
Yeah, it is, man. And it's interesting that you said that, right? Because I think when it goes to people that are gay or lesbian, their only view of God is how you treat them. And then if you treat them like there is something inherently wrong with you and you're going to hell unless you become straight, they then think that God hates them. And so when you go towards them, and I do have quite a few gay friends. I live in South Florida. There's quite a few of them. There's
drive by Wilton Manors every other day.
Not every other day. I mean, like the guy who did my tattoo, he's gay. There's different hockey families, people that that 2 dads, one kid, things like that. And it's when you talk to them, they just say, listen, man, I would love to know God, but the way God's been shown to me is that God hates me for who I am. That's an uphill battle to try and tell them that there is a loving God that loves them for who they are. What's really amazing is when you get to know them and you really just never talk about your faith, like the first 6 months they know you, and then they find out you're a Christian. They are blown away. They're like, wait, you're a Christian? You're one of those? Yeah. I've never known one that was nice to me. Like, they're blown away. They can't believe you're a Christian. You went to Oral Roberts?
Of all places. You went to Southwestern Assemblies of God University? Of all places. Like, I don't even know if we could have this discussion on one of those campuses. Like, they would probably say, oh, yes, we can. But I'm not so sure. That's nothing against them, but it's kind of to our point here. But when people are blown away that you're a Christian, but you didn't like tattoo it on your forehead, so that every time you meet somebody new, it's like, oh, I'm this, by the way, because that brings labels and implications and perspectives that might not even be accurate about you, but they just, like you said, they know their experience. And I love it when people go, wait, you're a believer? Yeah. They go, man, I've never had a really good experience with church, or I don't know. I literally had somebody said to me, why are you being nice to me? And dude, I don't really cry much, but dude,
Sad.
inside I was like, on a
That's really
deeply
sad.
spiritual level, existentially, it was painful. And it's like, and I'm not vilifying everybody. I'm not perfect. We're not saying that. But can we start with just loving people and go from there and realize they're you don't have that much control over them. And maybe you should be worrying more about your own eternity. I can't tell you how many people are like, oh, well, I want you to know I'm praying for you. And I look at that person's life and I'm thinking, buddy, you need praying for yourself, not me or anyone else. Like, you need to look in the mirror and start praying for you, because you're so in your own thing, you don't even see it. And they're not able to be convinced of it. But it's
Yeah.
almost like that's used as like a weapon. Oh, I'm praying for you.
I hate that term.
It's like, dude, your intent is wrong. You're malicious. And that's not where Jesus is coming from. And again, that's a lesson to us, though. If we find ourselves doing that, to stop. Like, if we see it in other people, like, make sure we don't do that.
And why won't you just pray for me right now? It's like, oh man, dude, I'm broke, man. I need some money. I'll pray for you. It's like, dude, I know you got money. You can at least offer me $20. Pray for me now. Do something for me now.
I had
And
a situation. Yeah, go ahead.
it drives me nuts. It's lazy. It's lazy, and it's disingenuous, which I
Yeah.
think is the biggest problem that we have right now in the church, is that we're just looked as disingenuous people that really don't care for the world around us, that is really hurting, that is really suffering. It's more about, we're right, and we're going to show you that we're right because we know we're right. And
as you do, we're going to believe
that's
you
messing
even
us up.
less.
Yeah, that is true. So yeah, so that's my soapbox, right?
Yeah.
No, man, it's just going back to, the whole purpose of this. We don't mean, and Brian and I know you do, Brian, we have a good heart, and we have a heart for the people around us. We have a heart for the church. We have a heart for the leaders in our churches. And I think that it's good to ask questions and say, listen, why are we as an institution doing certain things and not following what Jesus would want us to do? I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If we're a Christian, a follower of Christ, is what that means, is that we should be striving for those things of the way Jesus would go to people, the way that Jesus would love people. And I just think we get caught up too much into what I call the Pauline gospel, right? It's about Paul. And Paul's gospel was loving, but also it had the heavy hand. And I think sometimes we lead too much with the heavy handedness of it. The heavy handedness of Paul's gospel wasn't to unbelievers, it was to believers, because they were getting way out of hand. But he would always go and he would always show that God's grace was always there for the unbeliever. And we flip flop that to say, for the sinners, there's a heavy hand, you're going to hell. And for believers, oh, it's okay, you can do that. God's grace is going to cover you. So I think we need to, as a church, kind of get that fixed up a little bit so we can better, serve the people around us, because that's what we're called to do. We're called to serve those around us, right?
Yeah.
And to love on them and view them the way that God and Jesus would view them. So it's disheartening, man. It hurt me that you said that the person asked, why are you being nice to me? That nobody should ever have to ask that. That's tough.
And again, I agree. And that is individual. That's not every case. And again, you and I have so many friends who are pastors and ministry, mutual friends. Like, they're all over the place. Like, and we're not vilifying those people. We're not trying to, but are they seeing this because they've been in what they're in so long? Are they seeing what we're saying? You hear about churches shrinking. I heard a message a few months ago preached on, look, 50 years ago, this percentage of people went to church. 30 years ago or 20 years ago, it was this. Now with Gen Z, it's like this. Like, people aren't coming back. and the reason that was given, I'm trying to remember. It was, I don't remember the reason given, but it was one of several very valid reasons. And I'm sitting there in the chair thinking, you don't know why they're not coming back? I know why they're not coming back. I just don't think you want to hear why they're not coming back. And if I were to raise my hand right now, I think it would blow up your sermon. And obviously you wouldn't interrupt somebody, but
No.
it's like, are we really surprised? Like, look around you. Like, look how people are treated by Christians. Look how to me, it's unfortunate, but to me, the shrinking of the church in the West is the result of a self-inflicted wound by the church over
Mhm.
years, over decades, and centuries for that matter. But in more recent time, over decades, people have been so hurt so long, they're saying, I know what that is, and I'm not going to be a part of that. And neither are my kids. I would never subject my kids to that kind of torture spiritually, or that kind of treatment, when the Bible says God is love. And I understand where the church is coming from, but I also understand exactly where those people are coming from, and I don't blame them. And it just kind of comes back from that. But yeah, if you're a pastor and you're surprised why much of the church is shrinking in the West,
Yeah.
like, open your eyes, like, get out from under that rock. Like, if you don't know, like, you're missing it. Like, you're not in the game.
No, you definitely are missing it, man. And it goes back to, this is definitely a show me now generation, right? And they want to see the truth. They might try and say, truth is relative, truth is that, but they're watching you. They're watching how you live your life to
That's
say,
the truth.
if you say, yeah, that's right, that is the truth, right? We have really, my wife has a cousin of hers that just got married, and she didn't want even the word God mentioned in her wedding. And that was painful for me, because I feel so bad for her, that what she had to go through in her life to get to that point, that she doesn't even want God. Forget Jesus, forget anything else, but even just the word God to be mentioned in her wedding. And and I know what she's been through. And part of me is like, I don't blame her. You know what I mean? And not to sound mean,
Yeah.
I don't blame her, but it hurts me that people get to that realization because of the way they've been treated by people in the church, and how the church as an institution has treated them. Um, there's, it's it's the amount of abuse, I guess you could say, mental abuse, emotional abuse that happens.
Spiritual abuse. Yeah.
Spiritual abuse. It's, you really suck the life out of them. And as Christians, we're supposed to be giving life, not taking it out from someone. So for sure, man, I agree with you 100%. We have to look in the mirror every day and say, God, forgive me, but God, how can I do better? And I think sometimes we look in the mirror and there's fog on the mirror, and we're like, oh, we're good.
Yeah. Well,
Keep doing
and
what I'm doing.
the problem with that is that, yeah, the root, I think, of the problem with that is a word you used earlier in our discussion, the word conditioning.
Mhm.
That's, you're taught there's a certain way to do things over a long period of time, such as your whole life since childhood. You're conditioned. This is the way it is. This is how it's done. So much so that you don't even know anything else outside of that or other schools of thought, or it's so rooted deeply in you. You basically have to have a near death experience to wake you up and go, man, maybe that's not the only way, or maybe that's not entirely true. Something that really shocks you mentally and psychologically, to kind of shake you out of that. And it happens everywhere. It's not just the church. So it's not vilifying the church, but
Mhm.
there is a massive amount of conditioning. That's what the church is, a political organization, just like the government. And there is conditioning that goes on because they want everybody to go in a certain direction that they want. Problem is that often changes based on who's leading and what they want. And this guy believes you should tithe 20%. Yeah, I've been to a church like that before. I'm like, I don't think that's
Yeah.
biblical at all. And
Mm.
so many other things. You're like, where did he even get that? And it's like, oh, talking
Exactly.
circles around it. And oh, good Lord, man. Yeah. And then the own church staff can't hardly pay their bills or pay their rent because they're giving 20% of what the church is paying them back to the church. Yeah. And now you wonder why that guy doesn't go to church. You're like,
Yeah,
really? You don't understand? Oh, he's fallen away. I think maybe he got away and he found more of God outside of the church. At least
definitely.
that one, which is sad. But
And it is sad.
and there's the argument too. Well, if you're not plugged into church and or like a life group, small group, or you don't go regularly, you're not in community, what you're supposed to do. And I love what Donald Miller says about this. He wrote Blue Like Jazz years back. I've learned, he's mentored me in business some over the years with his newer thing he's doing. And amazing guy, amazing stuff, very insightful guy. One of the things he said to that, he was speaking, I think, at Oklahoma Christian University, and he was being interviewed. And they asked him about, well, plugging into small groups or staying connected to community, because he had talked about how he doesn't go to church. He talked about how he just doesn't personally connect with God in that way. But he has groups of friends outside of church who are believers he gathers with regularly. And he got, fried for that. And he said, well, think about this. People say like, well, if you're not plugged into a church, you're not plugged in at all. You're not being fed. And he said, well, that's not true. That's like saying, did you go to Arby's today? No. Why didn't you go to Arby's? Where will you eat if you don't go to Arby's? He goes, well, I can go to the grocery store. I can go to McDonald's. I can go to Applebee's. There are a lot of places I can get fed and get food. And it's the same spiritually, but in the church, it seems like this is the only place. If you're not plugged in here, you're not plugged in. Like that's so bizarre and ridiculous. It's unreal. That's like saying there are 50 restaurants within like probably 3 miles of my house right now, and they're all really good, and I will get full and enjoy myself. And there's also probably that many churches within that same radius. But even, and I'm not saying you shouldn't go to church, but like the whole point is being plugged in. It's just another example of something people they're conditioned with and they don't understand. When people meet at my fire pit back here, some of them go to different churches, some of them go to the same church, and some don't go at all. But we're gathering together with other believers, and there's that community, but it's not so rigid and structured and dictated by a church hierarchy institution, which I think I understand the value and the benefit and the reason that's done. I also think that's pretty harmful to the authenticity of the group sometimes, because if God's taken the thing one way and they want to take it another way, it's like, well, hey, this is our group, you're under the church thing and you agreed. It's like, yeah, but God's leading us this way, like to talk about this. Like, yeah, well, it's week 3, and in week 3 we're talking about this other topic. Yeah, but everyone's dealing with this. And it's like, come on, like, do you hear me? Am I talking to a wall? And so that we have to look out for that too.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I know we have like a little bit of like a basketball ministry at my church that started off by guys just wanting to play basketball on Monday nights. And it's been good. It's been good. It's not preachy. It's not anything. It's just that guys get together that are Christians and they invite non-Christians and they play basketball. And now we have a court at the church, and it happens at the church. Nice. But it works. No one's preaching to anybody. You know what I mean? But what they're doing, they're building relationships. They're getting to know people. And, unfortunately, there's such a level of distrust right now between the world, right? A Christian saying, meaning non-believers and Christians. It's sad, right? So how do we build those bridges to one another to kind of meet each other so we can build a wonderful relationship with one another? So whether it be a fire or
2 words, love people.
That's it.
That's love the only thing that's ever united people. And if it can unite enemies, it can unite people who are not enemies, but don't yet know each other.
Exactly.
It's like you said, if we can just start there, you've said it a few times. If we can just start there, I think that's the key to it all. If we can keep a lot of the dogma and the legalism out of the way long enough for people to just do that. I mean, if that isn't the purest example of doing what Christ did, then I literally don't know what else it would be.
No, I don't think so either. So you're right, man. It's all about loving people. It's all about showing people Jesus, right? Because that's what Jesus did. That's who Jesus is. It's just loving people. And I think that's what we're called to do. I think whenever we say, listen, I'm a follower of Christ, whether, depending on what denomination that you go to, whatever, man, as long as you say you love Christ and you follow Christ, you need to reciprocate that love back to others, because that's to me is what tells me that someone's a true believer.
And at this point in history, I'd rather not even say I'm a Christian. I'd rather just not tell them, and then just try to love and have a relationship with that person and be there for them, and just let it be found organically, because you're trying to live it, not preach it.
It's so funny. I kind of made a joke to my wife the other day. I said, "You outed me as a Christian the other day," and she started laughing. Um,
Who
you know,
outed?
my
Who did what? You outed?
my wife. She said I told her that she outed me as a Christian the other day to some people. I play guitar for the church I attend, and my son had a hockey tournament going on. People are like, "Where's Keegan? Where's he at?" She's like, "Oh, he's playing guitar for the church he goes to." They're like, "He goes to church? He's a Christian? Really? Oh, wow, that's cool. Can we see him play?" And then all of a sudden, they're on her phone and they're going on the live stream watching me play, and they're listening to Christian songs. I didn't do anything about it. I mean, that had nothing to do with me at all.
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing. They're like, we should go visit sometime. I never invited them to church.
Imagine that. Imagine that. You weren't even trying.
Yeah. I wasn't even there. You know
You
what I
weren't
mean?
even there.
So, but it's one of those things that now all of a sudden that people know I'm a Christian, but I'm still the same person. Now, a couple of people who are going through some issues, they're asking me for advice, or they're asking me for this and that. I'm just being honest with them. I'm not being churchy with them.
Yeah.
I'm just being honest with them. But again, that's not something that I went there to say, all right, these families that play with my child, I want them to become a Christian family. No, it's just I want to get to know them. I want to be their friend. I want to love on them. I want to see them the way Jesus sees them. And that makes things a lot more fun, and it makes things so easy because it has nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with me, right? So it's just getting to know them and loving them.
That you didn't lead with the label that, hey, I'm a Christian. If you go onto any college campus other than a Christian college, well, even some of those, and you go, I'm a Christian, immediately, if there's 50 people standing around you, they all have 50 different ideas of who you are. And I don't know that most of them would like you, yet they didn't even get a chance to know you, because that label comes with so many terrible implications based on people's true life experiences. And I love the fact she outed you as a Christian. I love that saying. That's so cool to say, because it's like they had a context and a little history with you. They had a context or even a pretext of who you are, and then they learn this about oh, is that what makes him tick? You didn't show up and go, here's what I am, and then they had already their predetermined ideas about what that meant, when those could have been completely false and probably would have been. And so is it even most effective to go around saying I'm a Christian in this day and age? I don't know that it is. Number one, if you're not just living it, like I think if you're living it, I don't know that you actually have to tell everybody. Like it's like the guy in the room who's going, everyone pay attention. I'm the leader. Hey, I'm the leader here. No, you're not. If you have to say I'm the leader, you're not the leader. If you have to go around going, I'm a Christian, maybe it's not a fair comparison, but I would venture to think that in large part it might be. If you have to tout it, I don't know that you are.
It doesn't mean what you think it means, right?
And it's certainly not being perceived in the way that you think you hope it is.
No, it's just a world that we live in, right? It's everyone's so connected now with social media. Everyone is so connected with their phones, right? They're so connected with all this different information out there. I mean, we're bombarded with all sorts of information by the minute of what's going on around the world, what's happening, to our schools, our nation, what's happening here, what's happening. There's just so much. There's Facebook that tells you everything that's going on in everyone's lives, and sometimes I always tell people, like, don't look at Facebook sometimes, because everyone seems to have a perfect life on Facebook, because that's what they want it to be, right?
Yeah, and that narrative is being directed too.
Yeah, it's
based on what's shown, what's not shown, what's highlighted, what's not. There's a narrative being dictated and controlled, by that organization, whether you agree with it or not, whatever. But like it is,
it's a business.
Yeah, and exactly. And people can say, well, I say, well, it's the same for the church.
Yeah.
Well, what do you mean? Well, let's just be honest here. Like, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. And if you didn't know, just maybe think about this. You don't have to agree.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. There are narratives that are being pushed, and like I said, we're all human, right?
Yes.
So we all want to push certain narratives. We want to push certain things. just going back to everything at what we talked about earlier, there's certain pressures on pastors, there's certain pressures on denominations that they feel they have to do things certain ways in order to grow.
Mhm.
Growing means not necessarily people, but maybe money coming in. Um,
That's usually
that's
the first thing it means. And
right.
well, the perception is if we don't have that, we don't have anything. And that's true.
Yeah. Or like I hate the stat whenever I hear a preacher say, we're only one generation from the church going away. And then I'm like, so what God do you believe in?
Because
If
this
you
has
really
happened for centuries. Jesus was like
yeah,
the first century. It's the 21st century. Like we're still here.
yeah,
There's multiple generations in one century.
yeah, I'm just thinking to myself, what God do you believe in? And how small is your God if you think that if something were to happen to the church, that the truth would not go on, if money doesn't come on, the truth sets people free. And once
Yeah.
you have the truth, it doesn't matter if you're in four walls or not, the truth is going to survive and the truth is going to grow.
Well, and that's with this whole series, questions for Christians, that's one of the big points. It's like people who are vilifying me for it and criticizing, and I'm not even being combative. I'm just literally genuinely asking questions. My big question is, how afraid are you of truth that you'll fight against the seeking of it? I mean, number one, I know it's fear. Like I understand that. I think the deep fear is, what if we discover, what if we follow truth to wherever it leads, and when we get there, we find out it's a little bit different than we were taught. That I understand is a scary thing for most people as a human. For me,
Mhm.
it's not, because I'm just like, well, God is God and we're never going to understand him totally anyway. So why not research and learn as much as we possibly can and follow that where it leads? To me, there's joy, there's happiness in that, there's discovery in that. But
Mhm.
I think one of the big reasons for the criticism and the backlash, I would say, is because, like, goes back to your word conditioning. We were taught it's this way. Well, what if we found out that there were some different things ultimately when we get to heaven that weren't true about the Bible?
Yeah,
Like, what if
it's
we did? And
possible.
Jesus is going, I don't know why you guys did that. Like, I didn't say that's not what I meant. Like, it's like,
What's wrong
you
with
know,
y'all? And like I
yeah,
say,
I wrote
you can
that
look
on a
at
leaf by candlelight.
yeah,
Like you
yeah, like this whole slave thing. Let's talk about this whole slave thing. It's how verses in the Bible were used and perverted. It's just it's something else. But bring up a good point. I'd asked you the other night if you had seen the movie Eternals. Did you get a chance to watch it?
I did not, but I'm going to now. Tell me about that, or what is that, and explain what it is and what your point is with that. I'd love to hear what you mean.
All right, so Eternals is about basically this. There's this celestial name Arisham that creates worlds, and then there was this dark predators that came out that were destroying worlds. So he had people from a world that he created go and defend these worlds. All right, so these people come to Earth, 7,000 years ago. That they're immortals, eternals, whatever. So as the story goes on, some of the bad guys come back. Their leader is killed. You're finding out what each of them have been up to the last, couple centuries here and there. But what's interesting about it is, and I'm going to spoil the movie for you, Ryan. I'm
Do it,
sorry.
do it.
And for those who are listening, I apologize. You could fast forward this part if you want, but it comes to a point where you find out that Arisham, the reason why he sent them to Earth is that he had planted another celestial on Earth. And whenever he does that, he's done it multiple planets, the planet is destroyed. So that the celestial from the power of the planet being destroyed is then birthed, right? And the celestial grows. Well, the whole group finds out about it. And you have three different groups that come out of that. You have one group that wants to follow Arisham's plan. They know it's evil, they know it's bad, but this is the plan. This is what we were led to believe for the last 7,000 years, whatever. This is us. We're going to go with Arisham and we're going to destroy this planet. You have another group in there that are like, this is wrong. We can't let this happen. We need to fight this. We love these people here. We're gonna, it changes everyone's mind. And then the third group is really one guy. He's just indifferent. He's just like, who
There's always
cares?
one.
What happens happens.
Yeah.
We'll see. I'm not gonna fight you guys about this. But the most interesting part about it is that the people that found out how evil this plan was, they stuck with it because it's what they've known. It's what they were conditioned to believe.
Mm.
This is the path of who that they want to follow. They say in the end, Erisham knows best, right? And
So
to me,
so Erisham is sort of like the God figure there.
right. It's just like a celestial, whatever.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you can look at Erisham in our discussion as the church or any institution, right?
Yeah.
That is telling you to do certain things to where, and it's not just Christianity. It could also be in the Muslim faith where you follow this, you're going to go here, you're going to kill these people. You have people in Russia, you're going to Ukraine, you're going to kill these people.
Yeah.
Why? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Why? And so the point I'm bringing that up to is just going back to the church aspect of it, is that when we start finding out, you know what, we shouldn't be treating homosexuals the way that we've treated them. We shouldn't be treating drug addicts the way that we've been treating them. Some people are going to say like, well, this is the way we've always done it, and
you're condoning it if you're not despising it.
Right.
And like, well, that's a polarizing thing. And I was talking to a guy the other day, and he showed me a scripture. I forget what it was in the Old Testament, where it literally says God hates certain people. Mm-hmm. He's like, well, of course, if we're justified killing them, God hates certain people. And I'm like, boy, I didn't learn that Sunday morning, and they didn't teach that in Sunday school. And I've got questions about that. Like, I don't know that that's true.
Right.
And if they go, well, it's in the Bible, I go, okay, well, is that true? So then we got the love and justice and that whole bag of worms of,
and then I would say, well, so God creates people that he hates.
Yeah. Why would he do that? Well, they chose to be something he despises because he gave us free will. And here was my argument. If I invented a brand new kind of car, never been invented before, and the thing starts malfunctioning after like 6 months, do I just go, oh, that stupid car, hey, get those other cars and let's have a demolition derby and just run into it and destroy it? Mm-hmm. Is it the car's fault that it's malfunctioning or not doing as it was apparently designed to do? Or is it the inventor's fault because it was the designer who designed it the way that caused the fault? And now I'm going to take that thing to a junkyard. I'm going to burn it forever because I care about it and I love it, but I'm not going to stand for its imperfections, even though I'm the designer and I made it with the imperfections. That just sounds like a God who doesn't want to take any personal responsibility.
Right.
That's on a very practical level. Like, and I have a problem with that too. Well, and then when I said that, people did this. Who is the pottery to question the potter? In other words, Brian, who are you to say you disagree with God or what we've been told in some of these stories is the way God is? Who are you? His ways are above yours and his thinking. I get it. It's all in there. I get it. But the problem and the whole thing with the whole Questions for Christians YouTube series is I walk away still without an answer. And it would just, even if someone just goes, you know what? Hey, you're right. I don't know. And I don't want to be right. I'm just looking to say, hey, is anyone, do they have an intelligent answer or are they willing to just say, I don't know? And the people who have said, I don't know, get this, Keegan. The people who have said, end of the day, I don't know. The only people I've had say that to me are people with advanced degrees in theology. Like the most educated people on this particular subject matter, not your typical Christian who's never been through Bible college or any formal theological, like deep training. The people who are least hostile tend to be the most educated on the topic. And the most judgmental seem to be the people who are least knowledgeable of the subject matter, or so it would seem. That's very general.
Yeah,
I'm not criticizing people, but that's what I'm seeing in my from this.
And some of it too is just their own insecurities. Right?
Exactly. And we all have those.
We all have those. I mean, we're all, again, I say it all the time, we're all human, right?
Exactly.
And so sometimes we approach things.
And I've been there too.
The wrong way. I've done it. I do it every day. So it's all right. My biggest take in all of that is the truth will always set you free. And for me, it's I understand, the person who wrote those scriptures to me were, they're in war, right? When you're the victor, you write the story out of who was the good guy and who was the bad guy.
The victor writes the history books.
Right. I'll leave it at that. I'll leave it at that. But when it comes to but what does that matter now, right? What did Jesus do? again, what did Jesus do? Jesus went to all the people who were looked down upon from the Jewish community, and nothing against the Jewish community. It's just the way it was back then culturally, and Jesus was Jewish. He was a Jewish man. So he went to all the people that were despised, right? And sat and ate with them, sat and got to know them, became their friends. And that was just too much for people. It really was. It was too much for people. And so when it comes to some of those answers, I mean, I really don't know except to tell you, remember the victor is the one that wrote it, and they have to say, well, God hated them. We're God's chosen people. But then when it comes to other things, it's like, well, how would Jesus view this? And how
Yeah.
would Jesus view those
nice how they
people?
picked and chose when they wanted to go that direction or the other. Yeah.
Right. And so it's just one of those things, man. It's David prayed for it, to have a heart of God, and Jesus was the heart of God, and that's to me is what it boils down to. Like you said, man, love people, love God, love people. You have that. That's your starting point for this beautiful thing, and to me, it is still a beautiful thing to follow Christ. Has it been perverted along the way? Yes. Like everything else. And anything that starts off good, once, like you said earlier, once it becomes institutionalized, it opens doors for outside influence to influence it, whether it be from a leader or somebody else whispering things into it. But it's just simple, man. To me, Christianity can be very simple. It's just loving people and loving God. And where it goes from there, it's where you have to have your relationship there with Jesus to say, listen, God, I just want to see people the way that you see them, and help me do that, because I am human and I have my biases about certain things. And I've had to, fight those things about, for example, homosexuality. I've had to fight those biases about people that had abortions, different things like that I was taught was very like, these people are sinners.
Well, then you think, then you have to ask, like, where did that bias come from? Like, was I born with that bias? I don't think I was. I think I was taught that bias, right? That hateful tape. That it's like we were taught that. And the big thing go ahead.
Yeah, certain denominations, if you go to the movies, you are a sinner, dude. You are a sinner for even just going out to the theater, because that's where drunks go and that's where sinful people go.
Yeah, man.
So therefore, you are a sinner, and you're going to
rated R movies. Well, guess what? The best-selling Jesus movie of all time was rated R.
Yeah.
Oh, you saw it too? Passion of the Christ. Mm-hmm. Boy, you watch rated R movies? Like, ooh, yeah, that Jesus one. That must have been an interesting conversation when it came out.
It's a bloody mess is what it was. Bloody mess.
But the thing we keep coming back to is, the question is like, are Christians following Jesus? And what does that mean? Well, ultimately it's are you loving people? And realizing loving people doesn't mean you're condoning their sin or saying it's okay. Their eternal destiny is not in your hands. You are not that powerful. You should definitely worry far more about your own if you really believe what you say you believe. But it all comes down to this with every issue. Do you love people? Now, that doesn't mean you don't take a stand when things, if they want to come in and teach your kids some backwards stuff that is just deviant at an elementary school. That doesn't mean you sit back and just don't. Oh, I'm just going to love them by not saying anything. Like, being passive that isn't what love means. Like, it can, but it's situational. It doesn't mean you don't stand up for what you believe in. But I'll tell you this, if you're going to stand up for what you believe in, you better have a damn good argument to be able to defend what you believe. Because, I mentioned Sam Harris, I think, before we started talking, right? Or I was telling somebody today, it was either you or someone else, but
it was me.
Okay. I was talking to my wife about it too. That is a person that I'll tell you right now, he's an atheist and he's basically Satan incarnate to most Christians. But I'll tell you right now, if you're an average Christian, you do not want to get into a debate with that man. He will destroy you. I don't care what you think is on your side. If you haven't thought these things through and really thought and studied, he will destroy you in public. And the guy, he makes a lot of good points. I think he has some biases, which again, we all do. So there's that. But no, even the Bible tells us be ready at all times to give an account for what you believe. That doesn't mean just throwing scripture at people because it says this. That's not what they're asking. In today's world, they're asking why you believe what you believe. And that's where this is coming out of with a lot of my stuff. I'm still very much a believer. I'm just looking at going, was I taught right, or is it kind of skewed? Why do I believe that? And if I'm going to be genuine and have integrity with myself, I have to ask those questions very transparently. And I have to be okay with whatever God leads me to in that. Well, the devil can mislead you. Of course he can. But if I'm asking God to help me, I don't think the devil's powerful enough to interrupt God and get in between me and God if he's telling me something or he's showing me something. I think that's giving the devil too much power. Not that people can't be misled, but that's a big fear. Somebody was saying, well, you should be asking these questions in private among believers, not out in the public town square, because you can lead people astray away from their faith. And my whole thing was, if I'm seeking truth, why would be afraid it's going to lead anywhere but the truth? If you're not challenged in your thinking, you're not going to know as much about God as is, true. And so I guess maybe I'm just not as afraid of it as other people, but I do understand and I empathize with those people. I get it.
I get it as well. I think the biggest movement that we see happening right now is a very sad movement. Is that people that don't get these questions answered, or that are just force-fed things, and the fear of God is instilled into them, is that you're seeing a lot of the deconstruction of their faith. And there's more books coming out about the deconstruction of their Christian faith than there was probably this last 3 years than there was the last 15 years. It's like something ridiculous like that of why people are losing their faith. It's not losing their faith because they had a relationship with God. They're losing their faith because it was either pushed on them, forced on them, conditioned to them. And then from there, they really didn't have a faith in the first place. It wasn't their own faith, right? It was just regurgitating things that were taught to them, implanted into them. And so as parents, you got 2 kids, I have a son, my biggest thing is to make sure that my son gets that relationship with God. It's not me just force feeding him Christianity. And my son, man, he's an inquisitive guy. He'd be a great lawyer. He would be an amazing lawyer with the way that he asks questions, and then just being able to have those conversations. Because kids will get honest with you real quick.
They see through. Oh yeah.
And so,
and they can Google everything in a moment's notice. I've had friends who are high school speakers. There was a guy, he made a statement during a high school assembly, and there's a kid who whipped out his phone and Googled it. And he's like, hey, you weren't so-and-so #1 running back in 1987. It says right here that so-and-so was. A 12-year-old did that. He whipped out his phone and fact-checked the dude on the spot. And it was a really uncomfortable feel in the gymnasium after that. Yeah. Oh, he's not even who he says he is. I didn't even know he wasn't. Oh, I was a McDonald's All-American, this and that. I hadn't even heard of McDonald's All-American. I just thought that was a hamburger. Apparently it's like you're you're a star player, and it's like, oh, you weren't.
You were, man.
And a 12-year-old just called you out and proved you wrong. That, like you said, that's the world we're living in.
That's the world we're living in, man. But that's something, again, we should not be afraid of.
If you're telling the truth, what do you have to be afraid of? Or if you're just going to say, if I run into a question I don't know the answer to, I'll just say, I don't know. Or that's a good question. I'd love to go find that out. I'm not an expert.
People can't argue with that. People can't argue with that, because what are they going to argue about?
They're going to do some research for them and maybe help them bring an answer back that might be helpful for them to answer the question.
Yeah. And so it's hard, man. I don't know the answer to everything. And like I said earlier, I'll die and not know the answer to maybe even 1% of everything that's out there when it comes to theology and God and life. But the 1%, I think the presupposition from the outside toward the believer is that they think that the average believer is claiming to know, and that's the approach, because I think that's the presupposition. Well, you claim to know, now prove it. And not just combatively, they might be combative, but they're also genuinely searching. If you really have an answer, I do want to know. But if your answers don't make any sense and you're like, well, this is the way it is,
And you're like, what?
Or you go off in some Christianese jargon that
Uh,
makes no sense to them.
yeah, then you just undid the rope from their boat on the dock and you just shoved it out to sea, and you're like, oh well, God will deal with them. And I'm like,
Mm. No, it's okay to say,
yeah.
listen, man, I just, I'm very honest with my faith. I said, I know, like people say, well, how do you know God is real? I said, for me personally, how do I know God is real? First and foremost, it makes logical sense to me that there is a God. I look at things and everything is so mathematically perfect that there has to be God. This
It makes
is
the most
number
sense that
one,
way to me too. Yeah.
right? That's number one, that there has to be a God. And no one can argue with that because mathematically, basically we're against the second law of thermodynamics, this world that we're in, right?
Mhm.
And I said, second thing is, for my research, I found that Jesus really is the way. For me, that really spoke to my spirit. And when I pray, sometimes I can audibly hear the word of God. I know that sounds crazy. I am not a crazy person, but everything that I do is that I want to look and live the life that Jesus lived, that where I can help somebody. And then along the ways, it blesses me. That's it.
And that's the way the world's set up. Like, it just reciprocates. You do good stuff, it just comes to you. You don't really control how or when or in what fashion, but it just does. And to your point on like, why do you believe in God? Here's the thing about belief. Belief is always 100%. There is no argument. Belief is always a matter of the will. We believe what we believe because we choose to believe it.
Mhm.
Now, there was a guy on Facebook the other day that he said, well, I don't trust the news media. Therefore, like, he was literally like, how do we know Russia's actually invading Ukraine right now? It's just another puppet to distract us. He was like, so he was saying like, Russia is not invading Ukraine. How do we know that's true? Now, him questioning it didn't make it false or true. But when I was texting my friends who live in the Ukraine saying, hey, how are things? And like, the Russians are bombed our airport in our little town last night. They're invading from 4 different spots. Like, he could believe what he wanted. And now we're talking about the definition of truth. It was true to him that it wasn't really happening because he chose to believe it wasn't, because he didn't believe the source that was talking to him. So
Mhm.
to him, in his head, that's the truth. But when you talk to people who live in this country that's apparently being invaded, and they're like, yeah, our military is fighting and killing theirs, and we have videos that I'm showing you blowing up their tanks and killing their soldiers, and us fighting them, like, oh, that's really happening. They're like, yeah, I live here, dude. It's real, it's
I
true.
live here, dude.
So when people talk about relative truth, not like that, usually is only goes one way, but there's also different kinds of truth, and you have to be very careful with that. But there's scientific truth, like it can't scientifically be truthfully proven or not. And then there's personal truth. And I'm not talking in the grand scheme of things, I'm not making a politician statement, but here's what I know. And this is a stark example, but you'll get the point when I say it. If a black person grows up in a black neighborhood and they only see white cops arresting and hurting other black people who they think are on their side or they're good, they're part of their community, it is going to be true to that person, to that black person, that cops are bad or cops can't be trusted. That is a personal truth. I never knew one person that was black until I was 15 years old. But the only encounters I had ever had when I lived in the city up in Michigan with black people, they were trying to fight me and steal from me. So I wasn't racist. I'm not. I've never have been. But my lizard brain, my survival brain is going, my personal truth is saying, don't go around those people. They're dangerous. Every encounter you've ever had. And so it
Mhm.
wouldn't matter if they're Chinese or, Mexican, wouldn't matter. But that's like a personal truth. That's like, now that is the black person who grew up watching cops abuse people, or they think they were, are they wrong in how they see that? No, that's their perception. And they probably saw some very unjustified things, but so did I. So I'm not saying
Mhm.
all black people are that way, obviously, but was I a racist or was I bad? Was my personal truth not true? No, it was based on life experience. And so there's, that kind of truth. And so that's a whole different thing. There are a few kinds of truth. I know people are going to hate me for that too, but think about it. I'm
Simple.
not being mean, but there just are. And sometimes It's just not the way you think it is. Mark Twain had a great quote. I think it went something like, "It's not what you know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for certain that just ain't so."
Mm-hmm.
And that's, our personal truth is subjective to that. Like that can happen. That's why we need to be a little more open-minded. Maybe there's more to this picture I haven't seen that can help me understand better.
I agree with you. I agree with you. I mean, like, it could be something even as simple as a restaurant. Every time you go, it's just been bad for you, right? Hurts your stomach. You feel sick. The guy sitting across you is the best place in the world to him, right? It's my favorite restaurant.
Yeah.
That is his favorite restaurant. For you, that's a restaurant you hate the most. It's
Well,
just,
maybe you're gluten intolerant and they're using food that has a lot of gluten in it. And he's not.
Yeah.
So who's wrong?
You're both right.
You're both right.
And that's the thing that we need to come to as a society, right? And I think also in Christianity, you both can be right and it'd be different. And that's actually a very beautiful thing. Because once you realize it's not about you being right and the other person being wrong, but you both are right, then you can meet at a mutual agreement. And then from there, learn from each other. Now you're learning something new. You're learning how you can become a better person, a better Christian. And then you start realizing, you know what? It actually helps fortify what I believe to be true. And maybe helps fortify them for what they believe to be true. But you continue to grow together and there isn't a schism there. So it's not about who's right and who's wrong, which is what we're being taught right now. It's what kids are being taught. It's what we're being taught on social media, the news, churches, everywhere. If you're not right, then you're wrong. No, you could have two people to be right. You could also have two people to be very wrong.
Yeah. But if you're not first, if you're not first, you're last, right? No, there's second place, there's third place, there's fourth place. It's not to quote Ricky Bobby, but it's like, it's that mentality though. And what we're not saying here, because I know the argument, you would face against the average Christian with that. Oh, so you're saying all truth is, there is no wrong, or, it's not obviously what we're saying. But even if you disagree with somebody, if you do it in the way you just talked about, you still respect each other and you can coexist. The other way, like, you eventually just get to a point where it escalates and now you're literally at war and your tribe is trying to kill theirs and vice versa. And what good did that do? It's like the right arm fighting the left arm. And then when the right arm wins, it goes, yes, I won, but not realizing at all, it just horribly damaged its own body and inflicted a horrible wound that could actually fester and ultimately kill itself because it wounded its own body, and we are the body. I think in a lot of ways we're God's fingertips. Like, we're all a fingertip, so to speak, where if we hurt someone else, it's like, well, we're part of that thing. We don't go unaffected by that. And I think psychologically and scientifically, I think that's, been validated in a lot of ways. If whether you win or lose a fight, like, nobody walks away unscathed. If you get in a knife fight, if a knife's involved, almost always both people end up getting cut, not just the person that doesn't have the knife. It's that kind of thing. And so, well, why get in the knife fight to begin with? Like, not to say there isn't a time, but I think the time to do it is so rare. Like, we jump to it. It is so rare when you actually need to, like, push the red button, Yeah,
but you see, right now everyone's kept on edge, right? Everyone is made to be antagonized. Everyone, and that to me is done by design, because
you can control people if they're afraid. That's why. If you make people afraid, you can control them and they'll do what you want. And they'll even defend what you're doing to them against people who are like, hey, they're hurting you. And they'll defend the person doing it. Yeah. Because they're so afraid.
It's the world we live in, my friend.
Yeah.
But like I said, but we have an opportunity, all's not lost. We have, to me, it's, in times of crisis, it's a time to create. And it's a time, I think, right now to create new and better things and how we can grow ourselves. Because the only person you can change in life is yourself, right? You can't change anybody else. You change yourself to being a better person, and you start treating people better. I think then that's how you slowly start changing the world. So all is not lost.
Yeah.
And it's okay to ask questions, and it's okay to be confused, and it's okay to be scared. But just know that there has to be that that safe place that people can come back and ask you a question, or you can ask someone a question. And
Yeah.
if you both don't know, you both don't know. You can both find out together, right? So that's it. There's beauty in those things that I think over the last, I don't know how many ever years, I've been looked over.
Yeah.
So as a church, as a people, followers of Christ, we can all go back to it being an original rally point of let's love God and let's love people.
Well, it's also a great opportunity for Christians and the church in general, because the crazier the world gets and the more at people's throats and edgy people are constantly and afraid and everything's so polarized, you stand out even better, even more when you approach people you might not agree with and you're just loving toward them. It is so weird that they're like, wait, we all just pull out knives when we start talking to each other and we're ready to go. You didn't even bring a weapon? No, I'm just here drinking some Sprite. And what do you think of that? Or I don't know. Yeah, but the crazier the world gets over here, if we just start with love, that stands out even more than if this world was still operating out of love, so to speak, or a certain level of it. This wouldn't be as distinct. But the crazier the world we're in gets, the more that you act like love in Jesus toward people, the more you're naturally going to stand out and influence. It's when you start acting like the world that it doesn't. And when people just notice you and they're shocked because you didn't bring a knife to the fight, you're like, that's not why I came. Even to the extent that I'm vulnerable. Maybe I need one to defend myself, but if I didn't bring a knife to the fight, that says not only am I not here to fight, but I'm willing to possibly die if somebody's out of their mind, but it's important enough to be here and not to bring that message. And so you stand out when you act like Jesus, when you come from love. Doesn't mean you condone anything. It doesn't mean you go against, what you think God means or condoning sin or anything like that. But if we start with love, things tend to work. It's like customer service rule number 1, be nice. If we all just start there, can we start there? Every time there's a disagreement, can we go back to love people, be nice? Like, love people. Let's just start there and then keep that in our mind as we progress in our conversation. I think that's the answer. Getting humans to do it, including myself sometimes, obviously, no exemption. That's the eternal battle.
Yeah, because we get hurt, and when we get hurt, we get upset.
Well, and not only me, I was Army infantry. I was trained to fight and kill people for a living. I was trained to, when there's a threat, you dominate it, you overwhelm it, and you destroy it as fast as humanly possible. That's what was drilled into me and then concreted into my mind in Afghanistan, where life and death was the consequence of not doing that. And it was reinforced. Then I come home and I'm like, I don't really want to live that way. Now, in a lot of ways, I don't need to. Undoing that, not to the extent where you're stupid or you're like, oh, you just wouldn't defend an innocent person. Not saying that. But undoing that hypervigilance, attack, overwhelm, destroy, and kill fast, because it's going to happen to you. If not, that it can be very destructive after you come home and you're not in that environment anymore, the war environment. But having that undoing those psychological wires and that yarn that's been all twisted and turned for that purpose, which it was good in there, in that environment. It was survival. But to live the rest of my life that way, here in the civilian world, it was very destructive. And I still deal with it sometimes. I mean, they call it PTSD, but earlier on, I was really bad with it. And I didn't even know how bad because I was so close to it and familiar with what it was. Right. But I think we all do that. And it's like, let's start with love. Can we just start with love? End of the day, we're all going to die. No one really knows anyway. Like, where you go and where I go, where you going to be in the same place? I don't know. Are there different parts of heaven? What do we mean by same place? Like, we can go on forever.
that is a pretty big rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Because no one knows. I've never been.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard enough stories where, yeah. You know
what I mean? So,
yeah, well, I think we've had a good discussion here, man. And I'm glad you reached out to me.
Oh, for sure. Anytime, man. Anytime. No, it's definitely, it's good. It's good to be able to express what you're thinking, what questions you have. And, I think it all goes back to some very self-evident truths, right? And that truth is this thing that we're trying to walk. What is it about? It's about loving God and loving people, and the rest of it will kind of fall into place. We treat people the way God wants us to treat them. Some of those questions necessarily won't matter anymore. And it shouldn't matter, right? You
Yeah.
just love people and you say, God, they're yours, and I love them the same way you love them. So hopefully that makes sense to people out there. I'm not trying to be like a unicorn and rainbows kind of guy, but just really love them the way that God would love them, which is accept them for where they're at and who they are, and just build that relationship with them, get to know them, be their friend, be their friend. And they're going to come asking you what's going on.
Yeah. If there's any hope for the human race of continuing on and not blowing ourselves, into extinction, that's that what you just said. That's it. That's our best bet.
Mm-hmm.
It is our best bet. Love people. Boom. Thank you for texting me the other day. I'm so glad we did this. It's been a long time since we connected anyway. And
for sure, man.
Yeah, loving people.
Anytime you want to talk, you know where to find me.
Rock on. So this is a good example of why people should talk transparently, and just explore things. It's okay. So,
and thanks for putting this together, man. I really appreciate it. It's always fun talking to you and getting to know where you're at in life, and just always seeing you smile, man. It's always a blessing.
Same to you, man.